They told me today that I'm going to be the world's ambassador for Barcelona. I'm very happy because I have a lot of love for this team. We won Ligas, Champions, scored in the Bernabeu. I made all types of goals with Barca. It's impossible to remember them all. I remember watching Messi training. Everybody was talking about him, the new kid, back then. He showed that he was going to have a great future. For me, it was a joy to have played with him and to see the history that he's making.
Ronaldinho once said, "There are 6 people in football he will never forgive. Not rivals, not enemies on the pitch, but managers, teammates, and even an entire fan base who turned his genius into a target." This isn't about petty arguments or bruised egos. This is about racism disguised as professionalism, betrayal dressed up as discipline, and a system that punished joy because it couldn't control it. From Paris to Barcelona, from Brazil to Mexico, Ronaldinho's career became a battleground where his flair was labelled chaos, his freedom called danger, and his identity weaponised against him. So if you're ready to hear the truth behind the smile, smash that hype button right now and let's push this legend story higher. Because what happened to Ronaldinho wasn't just unfair, it was systematic. It started in Paris. Between 2001 and 2003, Ronaldinho played for Paris Saint-Germain under manager Luis Fernandez, and from day one, the relationship was toxic. Fernandez came from the old school of French football, gritty, disciplined, built on collective order. Ronaldinho was the opposite. He played with Ginga, that improvisational Afro-Brazilian spirit that made him unstoppable. But to Fernandez, that wasn't art. It was a threat. When Ronaldinho stayed out late one night, Fernandez didn't just bench him. He publicly called him a spoilt brat, told the media that Ronaldinho lacked the maturity to lead a professional squad. Ronaldinho fired back, calling Fernandez tactically inept. But the damage was done. The narrative was set. The lazy, undisciplined Brazilian who cared more about nightlife than football. It's a label that would follow him for the rest of his career. And here's the thing. When white players party, they're called mavericks, colourful characters. But when black or Afro-Latino players do the same, they're labelled unprofessional. That double standard wasn't just present in the dressing room, it was alive in the stands. The Cop of Boulogne, PSG's notorious ultra section, was known for uninhibited racism, violence, extremist politics. Ronaldinho was performing in a crucible of hostility, where any deviation from the rigid European norm was framed as cultural deficiency. Fernandez didn't just bench a player, he participated in creating an archetype that would haunt Ronaldinho forever. And that's why Ronaldinho will never forgive him. Next came Samuel Eto'o, and this one cuts deeper than any manager's criticism, because Eto'o wasn't just a teammate, he was a brother in arms. In February 2006, Barcelona travelled to Zaragoza. The abuse started immediately. Monkey chants, peanuts thrown at Eto'o, relentless, vicious racism from the stands. Eto'o tried to walk off the pitch in protest, and Ronaldinho was the first one there. "Don't go," he said, "but if you do, I'm going with you." That moment became iconic. Later in the match, Ronaldinho scored a penalty and ran straight to Eto'o, holding his face in his hands. It wasn't celebration, it was solidarity. The headlines called it "Goals Against Racism." 2 of the most targeted black players in the world standing together against the bigots. It was powerful, it was profound, and it didn't last. In 2007, everything collapsed. Eto'o refused to enter a match as a late substitute against Racing Santander. Ronaldinho publicly criticised him, saying Eto'o wasn't thinking of the team. Eto'o exploded. He called Ronaldinho a hypocrite, told him to look at his own discipline before lecturing others, and labelled him a bad person. The media war lasted a week. The friendship was destroyed permanently. And here's why this feud is unforgivable. Eto'o had stood beside Ronaldinho when the monkey chants were loudest. But the moment Ronaldinho struggled, the moment the pressure mounted, Eto'o turned on him. He weaponised the same unprofessional narrative that racist managers had been using for years. He validated the lazy Brazilian stereotype that Ronaldinho had been desperately trying to outrun. For Ronaldinho, that wasn't just betrayal, it was abandonment. The psychological toll of performing in a racist country like Spain, where black players are routinely harassed, creates immense internal pressure. And when your closest ally turns that pressure into a public attack, the wound never heals. Ronaldinho will never forgive Eto'o, not because of the argument, but because Eto'o broke the one alliance that mattered most. Then came Pep Guardiola, and this is where the hypocrisy reaches its peak. In 2008, Guardiola took over Barcelona and immediately targeted Ronaldinho for removal. The justification? Ronaldinho's lifestyle was a danger to the development of young Lionel Messi. Let that sink in. The black Brazilian was framed as a corrupting influence. The white Argentine was the vulnerable heir who needed protection. Guardiola created a moral hierarchy: order over chaos, discipline over creativity, purity over contamination, and Ronaldinho was cast as the toxin. The reality? Ronaldinho had been Messi's primary mentor. He guided the teenager through his early breakthrough, teaching him how to navigate the pressures of elite football. But Guardiola rewrote that history. He turned mentorship into corruption, friendship into danger, and forced Ronaldinho out to AC Milan. The peak of his career was over. But here's where it gets worse. Years later, Guardiola became an outspoken advocate for racial justice. He said he felt ashamed of how white people have treated black people for 400 years. He called for apologies. He positioned himself as an ally. But the players he sidelined tell a different story. Samuel Eto'o, who Guardiola also forced out, said, "The manager has problems with Africans." Yaya Toure called Guardiola's treatment cruel, suggesting a deeper dislike of African players. Ronaldinho watched Guardiola build a reputation as a champion of equality, while refusing to acknowledge the racial protectionism that defined his early managerial decisions. That's why the feud is unforgivable, not just because Guardiola forced him out, but because Guardiola profited morally from a stance that contradicted his own actions. Ronaldinho sees the danger label for what it was: a professional assassination that erased his role as Messi's mentor and reduced him to a cautionary tale. In 2011, Ronaldinho returned to Brazil. His boyhood club, Grêmio, expected him to come home. Instead, he signed with Flamengo. The backlash was instant. Grêmio fans called him a traitor, but this wasn't just about contracts or money. It was about identity. Grêmio's fan base in Porto Alegre has a long, ugly history with racism. In 2014, a group of Grêmio fans was filmed making monkey noises at Santos goalkeeper Aranha, shouting macaco at him during a match. The fallout was unprecedented. Grêmio was expelled from the Copa do Brasil. Brazil, a country that likes to feel racially tolerant, was forced to confront the truth. It is not. Ronaldinho grew up in the Vila Nova favela, a region with a very low non-white population compared to the national average. He understood the dynamics of Porto Alegre. He knew the hatred directed at him wasn't just about football loyalty. It was about a fan base that used the traitor label to justify racialized aggression. And it wasn't isolated to Brazil. When Ronaldinho signed for Querétaro in Mexico in 2014, a local politician named Carlos Trevino called him an ape. Trevino was frustrated by traffic jams caused by Ronaldinho's presentation, so he took to social media and reduced one of the greatest footballers in history to a racist slur. The backlash led to the We Are All Apes campaign, a show of global solidarity. But the initial attack revealed the nasty problem that targets high-profile black athletes across Latin America. For Ronaldinho, the Grêmio fan base represents a culture fundamentally hostile to his identity. The traitor narrative allowed supporters to unleash vitriol rooted in herd mentality and racial exclusion. By choosing Flamengo, Ronaldinho asserted his professional autonomy, and the traditional white-dominated power structures of Porto Alegre found that intolerable. Ronaldinho will never forgive Grêmio fans, not because they booed him, but because they refused to grant him the right to make his own decisions without racist reprisal. Then there's Frank Rijkaard. And this one is personal. Rijkaard was the architect of Ronaldinho's greatest successes at Barcelona. He defended him, protected him, built the team around his creativity. For a while, Rijkaard was more than a manager. He was a father figure. But in 2008, as Ronaldinho's fitness declined and the club's board turned against him, Rijkaard changed. Suddenly, Ronaldinho was accused of using diplomatic injuries to avoid training. He was benched for poor fitness. The same manager who had shielded him from criticism now participated in the narrative that Ronaldinho was unprofessional. And this is significant. Rijkaard is Afro-Dutch. He suffered his own share of racism during his playing career. He was supposed to be the bridge between the Brazilian players and the Catalan board. But when the board decided Ronaldinho was a danger to the club's future, Rijkaard chose institutional survival over personal loyalty. For Ronaldinho, that was the ultimate betrayal. Of all people, Rijkaard should have understood the cultural necessity of freedom in his game. Instead, the manager participated in the civilizing mission that led to the 2008 purge. Even shared identity and shared history of resisting racism in places like Zaragoza wasn't enough to withstand the institutionalized pressure that demanded conformity. Ronaldinho will never forgive Rijkaard, not for benching him, but for abandoning the principles that should have united them. Finally, there's the 2024 Brazil national team. In a recent interview, Ronaldinho called the current squad the worst in years, mediocre. He said he wouldn't even watch their matches. The backlash was swift. Rafinha, one of Brazil's current stars, fired back. He pointed out the hypocrisy. Ronaldinho was asking for tickets to the same games he claimed he wouldn't watch. He was criticising players while benefiting from their success. But Ronaldinho's comments weren't personal. They were cultural. He wasn't attacking individuals. He was mourning the loss of Ginga, that African-inspired flair that defined his generation. Modern Brazilian football, in Ronaldinho's eyes, has been Europeanised. The joy scrubbed away in favour of sterile tactical systems. The soul replaced by mediocrity. This mirrors recent controversies like the Argentina national team's racist chants about the French squad's African heritage. Both situations expose the same tension: national identity versus racial heritage versus the globalised standard of professional football. Rafinha and the current generation see Ronaldinho as an alienated legend, out of touch with the realities of the modern game. But for Ronaldinho, the unforgivable aspect is that the current Brazil squad has abandoned the very joy he defended so fiercely against managers like Fernandes and Guardiola. He fought to protect Ginga, and the next generation let it die. So what do these 6 feuds reveal? They reveal a mechanism of professional alienation. Ronaldinho's unforgiving nature isn't about petty grievances. It's a reaction to the persistent application of racialized tropes to his identity. Lifestyle criticism became a socially acceptable proxy for racial bias. Fernandes, Guardiola and Rijkaard focused on nightlife and partying to marginalise a black superstar without triggering the anti-racism norms of the 21st century. It's staggeringly selective discipline. White players' off-field activities are ignored. Black players' activities are used to justify their professional destruction. The experience of uninhibited racism, whether from fans in Zaragoza, PSG or Grêmio, creates fear and humiliation that limits a player's ability to perform. When managers or teammates fail to support a player through that trauma, or worse, use the resulting performance dip as justification for benching, the rift becomes permanent. Ronaldinho's never forgive list is essentially a record of those who failed to stand with him when the monkey chants were loudest. Management became a tool of social order. The feuds with Fernandes and Guardiola show how managers use the narrative of discipline to suppress cultural flair and assert Eurocentric control over players of colour. The rift with Eto'o shows that even high-profile alliances against racism can be broken by professional hierarchy and the weaponisation of the lazy trope. The hostility from Grêmio and the insults in Mexico illustrate the herd mentality of supporters who refuse to grant black athletes the right to make their own financial and career decisions. And Ronaldinho's critique of the 2024 Brazil squad is a final stand for a version of the sport that values joy and soul over sanitised, mediocre tactical systems. These patterns weren't accidental. They were structural, embedded deep within football's institutional fabric, repeating across continents and decades. Each feud represents a different facet of the same oppressive system. Paris taught him that European football would never truly accept his cultural expression. Barcelona showed him that even success couldn't protect him from being sacrificed when convenient. Brazil proved that homeland offered no sanctuary from the same prejudices he faced abroad, and the current generation revealed that his fight might have been in vain, that the very essence he battled to preserve had been systematically eradicated from the modern game. Ultimately, Ronaldinho's never forgive stance is not bitterness, it's resistance. A a refusal to accept the institutional mechanisms that labelled him unreliable or dangerous. The world celebrates his technical genius, but his career remains a testament to the nasty problem of racism that continues to haunt the highest levels of football. These 6 feuds aren't footnotes. They're the story of a man who dared to play with joy in a system that demanded conformity, and when he refused to bend, that system tried to break him. Ronaldinho will never forgive, because forgiveness would mean accepting that what happened to him was fair, and it never was.